and here we are for another Ahsoka discussion show. We're on part 6 called Far, Far Away, and in these discussion shows, I always want to have a variety of opinions on the show. You know, most of the time the people I speak to are quite positive about the show in which I'm speaking about, but that is not the point of this show, just to only talk about the positives, because that's not really a discussion, that's just gratifying it in a lot of ways. And I've got my friend Ben here from Star Wars Timeline, who has been on, I think, all of the weekly discussion shows I've done for a while. I think Mandalorian, Kenobi, Andor, etc. You've been on at least one show. I've done loads of podcasts with you on Star Wars Timeline, and I've also done, you've been on my show on Genuine Chit-Chat to talk a bit more about yourself. So we've talked quite a lot over the years, really, and it's absolutely delightful. And this is going to be one of those podcasts where we are not going to agree on everything. And this is going to be more of a discussion, somewhat of a debate. I know, especially last week's episode, when I was speaking with Thomas, it was nearly 3 hours of either saying how amazing Star Wars was, or talking about our interpretations of certain scenes. This is going to be a slightly different one. I want to say that, yeah, you have some different opinions to me, but I hugely respect your opinions, even if I disagree with them in some respects. So, Ben, hello there, good sir. Thank you for making the time to speak with me. And how have you found Ahsoka? Before we talk about part 6, how have you found the first 5 parts of the Ahsoka show? And you can be as honest as you want, and we'll go from there.
First, let me try this one as Jedi representative here, the old Ben. Hello there. Look, Mike, it's always awesome to talk to you. You know, you've been on my podcast, I've been on yours. And you are opening the window for me, for somebody who has been in the dark. I've completely sidelined my Star Wars channel, you know, all the social media, just letting the fans enjoy what they enjoy. I always follow my own mantras. You know, if you're not in something, just step aside, remove yourself from it, let other people enjoy. And I really appreciate the great opportunity. Look, every time you and I talk, we have such a friendly and nice, we just hit it off right from the first podcast we had. We don't have to agree on things, to be friendly about it, to circle around the fire, you know, sit down. It's like, all right, my man, let's talk some serious Star Wars conversation. That's exactly what we're going to do here. As you've mentioned earlier, that's the whole point. Overall, and no surprise here, huge Dave Filoni fan and a huge Rebels and Clone Wars fan and Ahsoka fan in general since day one. Since she was first announced, I was back in the college days when the show was kind of secretly announced to the kind of the animators world before it was publicly revealed. I was behind. I was like, oh my God, let's go into it. Here comes Ahsoka. And we did have previous experience with seeing what Dave Filoni is able to do with live action. This, honestly, in short, is a complete dud for me. It hits the newest low. Maybe not low in effort. I'm always almost convinced that everybody always brings their best passions and best skill sets and wants to do the best. Nobody is trying to do a half-baked job, but it just feels like it's a total miss. It's, you know, my feelings on Kenobi. I thought that show completely doesn't justify its legacy characters, its rich lore, its amazing storyline that the prequel trilogy has brought, the story that was meant to be. And here we have an opportunity to explore Ahsoka post the original trilogy, which I would say it's quite an interesting period of time. There's a lot of things to do in it. And yet we get a show which is now 6 episodes deep, and I assume you saw the latest episode, and we're nowhere. So in short, in 2 words, I would say it's a complete dud. It's a waste of my time. I'm watching it just to be somewhere around Star Wars, somewhere in the loop. So when some of my friends mention something oh yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about.
And just to clarify, you haven't actually been that much of a fan of live action aside from Andor. And I will say that for me personally, I have been enjoying Ahsoka. I think it's got great moments in it. I've enjoyed all the Star Wars series. I think Book of Boba Fett was the weakest because I think that when it started to get good, they're like, hey, here's Mandalorian. It's like, okay, well, these Mandalorian episodes are amazing, but they shouldn't be in Book of Boba Fett, and you take away. And then Book of Boba Fett, the character was, my brother said it, actually, I haven't had him on the podcast or anything to talk about it, but I saw him the other day, and he's nearer your age. So he grew up with the original trilogy. He's not a fan of the prequels at all. He's definitely not as forgiving. And he said the annoying thing of Book of Boba Fett is you basically, when they created The Mandalorian, you don't need Boba Fett anymore because The Mandalorian represents everything that we liked about Boba Fett, his mystery, the helmet on, his coolness, his badassery. You've got all that in Mando, plus a cute sidekick, and he's the front runner of the show. And as soon as you bring when you bring Boba Fett into it, especially when Fennec Shand is better than him in every single way, you've just got Tamara Morrison walking around with his helmet off, trying to not be violent, which is the most boring thing ever. Which I don't disagree with those comments in a lot of ways. Nothing against Tamara Morrison, but they weakened Boba Fett in that show. The Kenobi show, someone online described it, and I think this is the perfect description for me. The Kenobi show is like a 5 or 6 out of 10 show with 10 out of 10 moments. There's a couple of moments in Obi-Wan where I think the end of episode 3 when Vader's like dragging Obi-Wan through the fire, that's amazing. When Darth Vader walks through the village and is like snapping people's necks and stuff, that shows the power of Vader. The finale fight, cinematography-wise, and with Obi-Wan fighting Vader looks incredible. But once you get, apart from those major 3 moments, then a few moments that some side characters say that are quite cool. The rest of it is just 3 characters with unfathomable plot armor, just kind of meandering around, and there's not really any emotional weight to it. They kind of try with Kenobi in some ways, and then they go, now he's fine. And you're like, what? And he's like, suddenly he's badass and destroys Vader. And you're like, where did this come from? So Kenobi, I think, although I enjoyed it, it's a show I'm not going to rewatch. I just watch the bits I like on YouTube, the clips, which I almost never do for stuff. I watch a whole movie or whole series to experience all of it. Kenobi, I don't need to, unfortunately. I thought young Leia was great the actress was great performance. Yeah. I didn't connect with the story that much. Same with Boba Fett. I like Mandalorian series 1, 2, and 3. I think they're all good in their own ways. I thoroughly enjoy them all. But for me, they're good Star Wars shows. But if friends of mine are trying to get into Star Wars, I do not recommend them Mandalorian. I recommend them Andor. I think Andor is elevated above all the other live action shows, including Ahsoka. I think there are certain moments in Ahsoka which for me hit higher and harder than certain moments in Andor, but as a critical review of the show, Andor is an amazing show. Ahsoka and Mandalorian are great Star Wars shows, and I think if you're not already a Star Wars fan, or you're not willing to forgive certain elements because you're a Star Wars fan, because as a prequel fan, I had to forgive a lot. You have to forgive quite a lot of things in the prequels to really get to experience them as great as they can be. And I think that Ahsoka also suffers from that in a similar vein to Mandalorian. I think it's a similar quality to Mandalorian, I'd say. Maybe slightly less accessible. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your opinion of the live action shows as a whole and your opinion
and in
of
general, to give like a quick summary to see how the Ahsoka compares.
I just gave mine, so I want to hear yours.
Right.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about it, we always talk in comparisons. Sometimes, the argument some of the fans make, well, don't compare it to what came in the past. This is now. This is the future. This is a new generation of Star Wars. Just take it for what it is. And, well, hold on a second. We compare all art. And I will always compare the new Star Wars to the old Star Wars, but not in terms of nostalgia of what I'm personally more attached to or invested in. Is for me, I come into Star Wars just like I come into everything else. I want a good story. Literally entertain me. Hold my attention for 50 minutes, for 2 hours. I don't care. I don't care if it's Jedi jumping around with lightsabers. You need to be able to tell me something that after the credits roll and after all the cool fireworks happen, you don't forget it like your YouTube video that you saw 10 years ago and you just don't remember it anymore. Because people gravitate to relatable characters and stories, and that's why the saga of Star Wars endures through generations. That's what's at the core. Now we get to the shows. And the first thing that blew my mind was the trailer to Mandalorian. It was grounded and mature and gritty. And so, oh my God, I'm maybe this will finally give me what I expected out of Rogue One. Right? It's that a matured, seasoned Star Wars for adults. And the show starts, and I had to embrace the show what it was because it stood out from the trailer. It is basically your Saturday morning cartoon, brainless, escapist fun. It's just a spaghetti western in space without rhyme or reason, without any intended story. It is not an epic in the sense that the Star Wars is. Obviously, it's a different format, it's a different character, it's a different time period, but it doesn't adhere to that grand genre of epic storytelling. And I said, okay, let me divorce myself from the fact that I expected this to be a Star Wars show. All right, it's about just the space cowboy. Let's roll with the show. In that sense, I was entertained for the first 2 seasons. It had some great action. It had a couple of really cool characters, like Mayfield. He was really cool. I felt Ahsoka was real Ahsoka represented in that show. I enjoyed it. Then second, we got the Book of Boba Fett, right? Or Andor. The Book of Boba Fett.
Boba Fett was next, yeah.
Boba Fett. That felt all over the place. It felt like it's just an anthology of ideas, half-baked ideas. We didn't go anywhere. There wasn't any end goal. So in other words, it's not a serialized show, what I really enjoy investing myself in. And neither it is effective single episode storytelling. We are all over the place. You're literally ripping your character from scene to scene without rhyme or reason. Like, okay, all right. At least I try to stay on the positive side and give it my best and enjoy just elements of it. Once again, not something what I subscribe to when I'm trying to invest 20, 30 plus hours of watching a live show. Then comes Andor. And for the first 3 episodes, I was wary. I wasn't completely sold. I was still kind of like on guard. Like, where are you taking me this year? Where's this going? This is clearly much more focused, directed, single vision experience that we ever had before. Well, where are you going with this? By the end of episode 3, I'm sold. By the time that the show is over, I'm like, oh, so I see what's happening here. It's making ripples all over the internet. Oh my God, it didn't make as much viewership or money. Oh no, that's the reason because it's the most mature one and fans don't like to watch it. Their brains are dull. Star Wars can't regurgitate or accept anything that's just like made for kids. You look at it and you realize it's a decent show, which looks spectacular in comparison to everything else that Disney Plus has done before. And in my view, Star Wars used to be a phenomenon. Back in the, if I may, entertain your viewers, back in my day, it was a phenomenon. When you talked about Star Wars, you talk about absolute highest quality of standard of filmmaking. And okay, Andor is good, but Andor is a good 8 out of 10 show. Now we get to Ahsoka. And by the way, with all of these shows, I have zero expectations. I don't care where you take me. I don't care what period of time it takes place, what characters are going to populate it. All I care about is what I'm witnessing on screen. Is it purposeful? Is it tense? Does it hold my attention? Do I understand what's happening with these characters? And even though it was Dave Filoni, I was on reserve. I'm like, okay, that Rebel show he's working on, what is this? The first Disney effort? Let's see what it is. I'll give it the benefit of a doubt. I did the same with The Bad Batch. Now in the live action, Dave Filoni is fully helmed by him. Okay, let's see where this goes. Zero excitement. I watched the first.
What do you think of Bad Batch? Just to connect, because just so
Fantastic.
I know before going into and Rebels and Clone Wars, you think?
I think Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Bad Batch to me represent one single unit of just some of the most exceptional Star Wars that we have seen after the original trilogy.
Perfect.
And then we see Ahsoka, and it just took one episode to realize, well, maybe second episode will get better, it'll pick up the pace. Like, no. Once you see the product in front of you, once you understand what this is, I'm like, you know what, let me just extract myself from it, let fans enjoy it. I'm not going to jump on my channel, start all of these laser eyes, like controversy, Disney ruined, charts and viewership going down, kind of like bullshit videos. Let fans enjoy it. Just please, the only thing that aggravates me, and people come at you and start debating, like, you don't like excellent shows? You don't like great cinema? Ahsoka is the type of project that I'm beyond trying to justify it and say, well, this part and that part is good. All I'm trying to do with the best of my capacity is put effort into finding anything that resembles storytelling. And it's not existent in the show. People say things and things happen. And that's the end of it. That's it. That's all I got there.
And may I ask, the episode that really, a lot of people found the previous episode, so part 5, where we've got the big world between worlds stuff, you've got the Anakin, the Ahsoka stuff.
Right.
That was a moment that a lot of people who weren't enjoying Ahsoka suddenly started enjoying Ahsoka.
Right.
And that is a moment that I think a lot of people are holding that episode in very high regard.
Right.
Now, people have heard me talk about that episode for like 3 hours in the last episode, and many of my interpretations on it. But you also weren't as much of a fan. I wonder if you could explain what it was about the prior episode before we delve into part 6 that didn't appeal to you specifically.
Sure. Nothing appealed to me. I understand why fans come to it and why they celebrate it. And when obviously the biggest, Star Wars YouTuber channel, Star Wars Theory, look, enjoy what you enjoy. I'm not going to criticize you with your personal taste. And he's like, I think recently he made a post like, hey guys, I don't understand why everybody's like trashing on this show. I really enjoy it. This is some of the best Star Wars. And he's very critical of Disney era Star Wars. And he's enjoying it. And I understand why he's enjoying it. He's enjoying it in the same way that my peers, when they were 18 and 19, were enjoying the prequels. It's some people listen to music when they can like drive a car and commute to work or something like this. Me, it's a process. It's a meditation. It's the same way I absorb cinema. So when somebody else besides me watches episode 5 of Ahsoka and completely relishes in it, I don't begrudge them. I understand where they're coming from. They see Anakin represented by the character, by the actor they grew up with. Of course it's going to touch some nerve. Of course it's going to draw out some emotion with you in relationship to the past experience you had with Star Wars. Oh my God, now he's going against Ahsoka live action. How people cannot like this? This is grand. I never thought this will happen in my lifetime. And here it is. It's happening. And they're making these swashbuckling moves and crazy stuff is happening. That's it. I don't need anything else. Get out of my face. This is amazing. 10 out of 10, 15 Oscars. I get that sentiment. It's people picking and choosing things, these icons. Anakin in his Clone War, armor. The World Between Worlds bridge. I'm literally talking about bits and pieces which are iconic to fans, which fans will always carry on their shoulders and, the greatest thing that was ever created by man. And then they watch the full thing. Oh my God, did you see those little, little sparks? They have flashes and different, pieces of warfare are being shown via like these visions or segments. I understand why it blows people's minds. What's really, really tough for me to follow is that it's all painfully obvious to me. I understand what buttons Dave Filoni is able to push. That's as far as his talent goes, as far as live action is concerned. And with people see and recognize it, I'm so reluctant to say it, but the critical thinking goes out the window and becomes all emotion. Like, Ben, I cried during that episode. I'm not going to laugh at you. Anakin might represent the best memories of your childhood, like in mid-2000s or whatever. I understand where you're coming from. But this is not storytelling. We are treading in this nostalgia where we have two fan-favorite characters that he's trying to teach her a lesson in that episode. Can I curse? Can I drop the F-bomb?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the fucking lesson? What's the lesson? We spent an entire 50 minutes on it. What's the lesson? She's not 12-year-old Ahsoka. We're following a character who's a grown, seasoned Jedi who has outgrown the entire Jedi Order in her wisdom. What other lesson is there to learn? Are you fucking kidding me? What's going on here? Why are we going back? It's almost like Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau. I'll put the same Rian Johnson in the same basket, J.J. Abrams. It's like adult Star Wars nerds playing with Star Wars stuff. Like, yeah, what if I could do this? I'm going to put this little episode. Yeah, we're going to do this. And you get to the episode. That's the end result. You're watching this episode. Okay. I'm trying to teach you how to survive. My dude, she has survived the Clone Wars as a kid already. She's past that point. Why are you dragging us, the audience, all the way back there? And at the end of it, there is no lesson learned. What is the lesson? But Ben, if we look at the allegory, interpretation, she falls and then she gets up again. Like, honestly, I should be able to parse and figure out what the story is without ever referring to anything else Star Wars. If I can't, that's not storytelling. If you are relying on my knowledge of Star Wars to show me what's on screen and to be able to just go and figure it out, you'll get it. Star Wars fans get it. No. You tell me a story through a sequence of images and pictures and what is being said in character, in moment, relevant to that moment, bit by bit, second by second. That is what the art of filmmaking and storytelling is. You need to lead me there. I need to be in the moment. I need to feel the tension. I need to understand why what's on the screen is happening. And all I got was an episode of Clone Wars extracted there. And besides the point, what really brings the whole experience down in episode 5 is that the production values looked like it was a really expensive YouTube video. Like, honestly, you're just going to put some smoke in there? We're running. Like, oh my God, look, live action clone troopers. Let's see where this war goes. And then they shift the camera, and all it is smoke and superimposed Photoshop image on top of it. And that's it. That's supposed to elicit some kind of battles of days of yore when the great Jedi fought before, and it's supposed to elicit an emotion. This is a multi-billion-dollar project on Disney Plus. I cannot believe like what I'm seeing there, and it passes for something that people call storytelling. It's beyond me. I'm like, okay. There's my long rant on episode 5. I can't wait till we get to episode 6.
I will say, before we delve into episode 6, like I've been loving Ahsoka. I thoroughly enjoyed episode 5. Obviously, I'm a prequel kid, so agreed. Emotional response was a large reason as to why I enjoyed that episode. And I think the majority of Star Wars fans would feel similarly. I would disagree that I don't think it looks necessarily bad. When you say Star Wars YouTube video, I see what you're saying, but I would also argue that Star Wars YouTube videos, some of them are so high quality now that people get hired into production companies. So I think, and I think that people are so clever with so many elements, it can, unfortunately, the quality of YouTube's gone up so high, it's almost like, how do big budget productions, especially in not a movie, how do they compete? I never had an issue with the production or anything like that. I will say that as much as I loved the last episode, and I spent a very long time talking about my interpretations of it and what the lesson I think was, I think the long and the short of it was Ahsoka was holding on to the fact that Anakin became Vader. She never got over that from Rebels, and she's been holding back the whole time. That's what I perceive it to be, and when I spoke with Thomas, we both had completely different interpretations of it, which I would then argue, although it's fun to discuss, if it's not really obvious as to what it is, then, and you have to make people interpret it, as you say, you're not giving the viewer enough. You're basically saying, here's some loose stuff. He's kind of giving her a lesson, and he's kind of fighting her and taking her through stuff. And it's like, if it's not clear and concise in a lot of ways, like when you watch some of the best movies ever made, I throw Shawshank Redemption out there just as a classic, or Castaway, things like that. When you watch those movies, there's interpretations of what the overall message is, but every beat, every scene, you know what is happening. You know what the character is doing, why they're doing it, and when the next scene happens, you can see clearly why. And in the Ahsoka flashbacky stuff, in my opinion, although I enjoyed it, for me, the previous episode, part 5, was almost purely like, hey, if you haven't seen Clone Wars or Rebels, you should go see them. We're going to constantly hint in this episode that this isn't the Ahsoka knew Anakin was Vader. Hey, look, here's Ahsoka right at the start of the Clone Wars. Here's Ahsoka right at the end of the Clone Wars at the Siege of Mandalore. If you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it because it's really good. It almost felt like, and this is coming from someone who loved it, don't get me wrong, it almost felt like an advert for the animated stuff, and being like, you know how cool this is? Well, the animated stuff's even better. Go watch that. Here's just a taste of the stuff you're missing from Ahsoka. But actually, plot-wise, it was the death and the resurrection. A lot of that stuff happens in a lot of mythology, and it's, very much intertwined with a lot of Star Wars lore. They touch upon it in this episode. And I think it's kind of her letting go and her kind of becoming herself a bit. But I do agree that my opinion of the Ahsoka series, as much as I have enjoyed it, the plot is probably the weakest part of the show. So
I would argue it's non-existent. I would say that we took 6 episodes to get to what the premise of the first episode was. Mm-hmm. You dragged us across 6 episodes of this multi-million-dollar project just to get to him. And I'm going to drop the biggest question when we're going to get to episode 6.
Okay. And I will say, like, again, I don't necessarily disagree with your opinions on this show. You've put a few opinions on social media, but as you say, you haven't been like overtly putting loads and loads of information on there. You haven't been slating anyone else. You've just, every now and then I see little trickles of your opinion on the show. And I will say that, as I know you put plot first, which I know that you would argue you should do for, when you're consuming this kind of content, I would say that the plot of Ahsoka is the worst part. I'd say that, and that has been an issue of mine, where it is the entire, up to episode 6, or part 6, the entire story has basically been, right, let's get all the gang back together, let's go find Thrawn, and now we've got him. And that's taken about 4 hours to do that. When in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, in less than 2 hours, you told the entire plot of introducing all the characters. Exactly. So although I disagree on certain elements, I think the cinematography has been amazing. I think the visuals have been really good. I think a lot of the Anakin Vader stuff is very cool looking. But I do think that a lot of Ahsoka has been the coolness factor, or these action scenes, which I know you weren't as much of a fan of. I did enjoy. I don't think they're the best. I have been enjoying them. I feel like all of it has been pretty good. And then there's moments that hit my nostalgia that make me enjoy even more. But I will agree with you that I think the plot is the thing.
And I will not disagree with you that some visuals are quite striking when I'm going to hit this discussion on episode 6. They are. But for me, as I mentioned to you 100 times, you're tired of hearing it. If the story doesn't click, the rest of it doesn't matter.
Which is fair.
The fight between Ahsoka and Anakin was not that bad. What really prevented it for me from truly enjoying it is a slow pace. It felt very choreographed, and that extra anime stuff that they put in there, it takes you out of the experience. And again, when you're beyond the point of caring about who you're seeing on screen, what they do is irrelevant.
Yeah, which is fair. And also an issue, and then after this I'll ask for your opinion on part 6, but an issue with Ahsoka as well, and it's an issue I raised, I think, when myself, Math and Dave, we went through the Star Wars Rebels series and we reviewed each season, and how I think season 4 of Star Wars Rebels is probably the best piece of Star Wars storytelling that exists, apart from arguably the original trilogy. But I'd even argue series 4 of Rebels might even be better, but that's a whole nother conversation. We did a follow-up episode, which was kind of reviewing the trailer and discussing our expectations and what we think about Ahsoka. And I said that my issue is that because we know that Filoni's making a movie that the Mandoverse is all building up to, this series is basically going to try and essentially somewhat retell stories of Ahsoka from Clone Wars and Rebels because the majority of people who watch the live action shows have not seen Rebels or Clone Wars. Right. As much as in the fandom that you and I are a part of, because obviously we read Star Wars things, we read some of the comics, anyone who reads books and comics has already seen all the animated stuff. Yeah. But I don't think there's anyone who's read books and comics, excluding Legends. I don't think anyone's read modern canon comics and books who hasn't seen the animated stuff. That just doesn't happen. It's the tiers. You watch all the movies, then the live action stuff, then the animated stuff, and if you like each tier you go down, you delve deeper. And I find it that almost the deeper you go, the better it gets. As I know you've done several podcasts on Star Wars literature, it's actually better than the vast majority of Star Wars content. Yeah. And I would agree with you in a lot of points. I think the High Republic books completely destroy almost every piece of Star Wars content that has come out since the original trilogy, bar maybe Andor and Ahsoka, and I love Revenge of the Sith, but some of the books are just knock it out of the water. But the thing is with Ahsoka is it's this build-up, and it's this false drama, because unfortunately, this is kind of a spoiler, but I'm so certain people would realise this watching it, Thrawn isn't going to die in Ahsoka. Ahsoka's not going to die in Ahsoka. This show is serving as a massive prologue to the movie that's going to come out, and that's where all the stuff is going to happen. It's rumoured it's going to be, Heir to the Empire or whatever. Filoni's making basically an Heir to the Empire movie, but instead of with the legacy characters like in the books, he's going to use the Rebels cast and some of the and the Mandalorian and people like that.
The castrated version.
Well, in your view, yes. I mean, I love those books, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're perfect, and I think there are many other Star Wars books that are better than the Heir to the Empire books, but they're really good. Don't get me wrong. I think they are a really, really good read. But I think that this movie, all this stuff around it is just a build-up to the movie, and that takes away dramatic tension, because I was like, they're not going to show Thrawn in the first episode. They're not even going to show Thrawn halfway through. They're going to save him right to the end. And I've predicted this. I said this several episodes ago in the discussion. There's going to be some sort of conflict with Thrawn. They're going to, the goodies are either going to win and Thrawn's going to get away, or they're going to lose and they're going to survive. And then the Heir to the Empire movie is going to kind of start off where Ahsoka finishes, which is Thrawn's out in the galaxy. trying to get forces, and then this new cast of people that we've been introduced to, or that we knew from, animated stuff, they're all going to band together and they're going to fight. And there's going to be some one line here and there to explain why Leia and Han are too busy to get involved. And it's all going to be this new cast of characters basically redoing Heir to the Empire, which I'm not necessarily against, but then you just know, we know that Thrawn isn't going to survive because the problem is the sequel trilogy exists. And Disney have basically shot themselves in the foot because, like with the prequel trilogy that I love, when you make a prequel series, storytelling-wise, you've completely cornered yourself because there's certain things that literally cannot happen, and there's certain things that have to happen. And I think that is the biggest weakness of this show, that if this show was released before the sequels, which it wouldn't have done, obviously, but if this show got released after Rebels came out, before any sequels, this would be phenomenal. But the problem is, because we already know what's going to happen, it immediately, it's weakened itself before it's even begun.
There are several things at play here.
Please.
It's partially, we can blame it on the format of this new, because look, all cinema, all art, it's also, there's a business aspect to it, right? You need to sell it in order for fans to enjoy it, and then you can give them more and earn money in the process. I'm all fine with that. But the way that the format of streaming media and how we got used to just watching things on demand whenever we wanted, however we wanted, that has disrupted, along with the state of, I would say, the quality of filmmaking in general in Hollywood. Coupled with that, it kind of adds to the burdens of the show. Plus, when you set up a precedent that in your show, a character could get stabbed in the stomach by a lightsaber and survive it, well then, why worry? Why continue watching past that episode? Anybody can come back. There is no reason for them not to, because if the story deems them important to survive, they will. At least Qui-Gon Jinn had the decency to and just die, pass into a different world. Ain't happening here. So there's just a number of permutation of different bad accidents that just mush together, and they snowball and they keep rolling and rolling and rolling, that it descends the show into a territory where, for me, it just becomes unwatchable.
Which is fair. And it's another reason why I say, and it's almost my catchphrase, why the High Republic, in my view, is the best stuff that's come out. Apart from certain individual books.
You're not allowed to take risks. You're not allowed to explore. Look, a lot of fans today, especially 20-plus-year-old expanded universe purists, who are just band together into the small little cult, and they love to diss on everything that Disney has made. Oh, it was better back in the day, perfect Star Wars. My man, if you were only there to have experienced the early years of the Bantam era Star Wars, you would have scratched your head and been like, what the hell is this? Is a Star Wars? And today these kids are like, no, this is pure Star Wars. They treat it with respect and continuity and all these little terminologies they use. For me, it was the excitement of it because it was the unexplored country. Because all of these authors said, what are we doing again? And George Lucas was like, I don't know what we're doing. Just roll with it. I'm going to prove it later. Just go with it. We don't know what the story is. And a lot of these authors are like, what is this spaceship called? It was the fertile soil to be playful and experimental and just take these new characters and pit them against the existing characters. Like, obviously, Luke, Han, and Leia were the untouchables because they sold the franchise. But the world built around it was so ripe with creative energy. And I felt that the longer the expanded universe stayed, as it were, it started writing itself into creative corner. Now comes Disney, and they started taking this whole canonical storytelling much more seriously. They ran themselves out of creativity a lot sooner than the expanded universe did. And at this point, to be frank with you, I don't really care what happens in these future stories. Like, I'm disinclined to follow anymore. Like, people are saying the new Rey's movie's coming out. I don't care. I want something like the High Republic. Take me to a place I haven't been before. Be exciting. Be different. Be daring. Kill your characters off. Thank you, High Republic. Mm-hmm.
I agree. And that's one of the reasons I say to people, like, all the criticisms you've said are valid. And it's why I love the High Republic more than any other Star Wars property. There's individual books that are amazing. Shadow of the Sith, Lost Stars is phenomenal. And There's a book, Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade, that recently came out. That's fantastic. But if you've read if you've read the Darth Vader comics, you literally know the fate of the main character. So it's immediately, you know what I mean? But with the High Republic, as you said, like, because it's hundreds and hundreds of years prior, apart from like 5 characters like Yoda and stuff, everyone could be killed. And they genuinely kill main characters. And not just in the last book of everything. And
there's integrity to that story. It's not done for shock value. It's not done there to increase the ratings on Disney Plus because X amount of people are watching it. Books give themselves owners. It's almost like indie games versus AAA games. They have that opportunity to be daring.
Agreed. So we'll move on to this episode. So it's part 6, Far, Far Away. And you're going to be far more critical of this one than I am. But I'll say that with me, I enjoyed the episode because, you know me, I enjoy pretty much all Star Wars. I've said on the show many times that the piece of Star Wars content I've enjoyed the least is the Clone Wars movie. I'm not a fan of that. And then followed that is Star Wars Resistance, which I know you like more than I do. I'm not a fan, but that was really a struggle to watch. But aside from those two, and again, I'm not anyone who enjoys them, power to you. I personally don't really enjoy them that much, but the amount of content I consume for Star Wars has got to be something I don't like. But like with this episode, I loved the last episode. And I loved so part 4 and part 5, I actually really enjoyed. I'm a sucker for lightsaber battles. You put that in any Star Wars content, I'm going to enjoy it more. That's hands up, open. It's my favorite thing about Star Wars is lightsabers and the Force. And so I loved those elements of the episodes. And then with this episode where it was trying to, I mean, this episode kind of pushed the story along almost more than any of the other episodes. Right. But I found that it felt very conflated. It felt like this episode, and again, I enjoyed it, and there's parts I've written down that I did think were cool. It felt like this could have been a 20-minute episode of Rebels, and it was or Clone Wars, and it was a 40-minute episode. And there's so many moments where I'm like, is there any value to these elements? You know, Sabine wandering off for ages. It's cool to watch. Yeah, you got a new thing called a Howler that's quite cool. These weird little notey hermit crab people. They're cool. Feels kind of Star Warsy. I like that. But equally, there's no real benefit to her meeting any of these things. She could have just walked out by like 20 meters, fell down a hole, found Ezra, and it would literally be the same. So that's kind of my view on this. Although I did enjoy the episode, I found that this is one of the weaker ones, and I found that the premiere episode was definitely the weakest for me, the first 2 of the whole of Ahsoka show. Yeah. So I'm going to pass the baton to you and I know you're going to be hypercritical of this, and that's okay. So what did you think of this episode as a whole? What were if there's anything you did like about it, let us know about that, but also what are your big critiques of this episode?
The space dogs were cool.
The Howlers, I think they're called.
It's definitely is. If we take away the part that I said, there is no dramatic narrative happening anywhere in the show. It's the most plot heavy. It got the farthest. It's interesting to see that they're trying to bring the old and the new together. It's always brings pleasure to me to see Dathomiri witches. Like, oh my God, this looks a lot more in line with I remember I personally enjoyed from back in the days. The problematic parts are, and I know some of your female audience might crucify me, but I'll try to rectify this. I'm still saying this. I don't buy Sabine as a warrior in this show. She looks like a 10-year-old boy. In that action scene that took place there, first of all, she only exists for the purpose of finding Ezra in this show. She's a non-character. When we find her in this show, she's not doing anything. Ahsoka is not doing anything. We must find Ezra because there's nothing else happening in the galaxy. Your life is pointless. X amount of years has passed since your friend disappeared. Is the fate of the galaxy dependent on him? Did you forgot to give him the final romantic kiss in the romance that you've never had? Why are you looking for him again? Never mind that. I'm looking for Ezra. Okay. Now she gets to the planet. She's looking for Ezra. And when that action sequence happened there, I thought her story arc in Rebels was to embrace her Mandalorian heritage. And granted that in the ancient Mandalorian lore, when we go to the expanded universe, yes, there were Mandalorian Jedi. Some were Force sensitive, although it was not part of their tradition. They were traditional enemies of the Jedi. All right. there's so much dissonance happening, and they're trying to pull her character in 10 different directions. She tries to be a Jedi now, which I don't have any problem with anybody in the Star Wars universe using the Force. When I was a kid, I looked at Luke Skywalker. He wasn't special with me. He didn't have 100,000 midichlorians. He's the kid who put his life and effort into studying this Force because the situation demanded it for him to rise to the occasion. That's what he did. And later on, when he reveals to Leia that, the Force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. Not by bloodline, not by privilege. My father has went through the steps, and I, in my father's footsteps, have become such a Jedi myself. That's what using the Force meant to me. I don't have
like a belief, isn't it?
Like a belief, like
he can go
an
through
effort and talent, all of that put together. And obviously, some are more talented in the Force than others. But when you see this frail, tiny actress do anime like you mentioned earlier, it's fair to say it could have been an amazing 25-episode animated show. It doesn't work in the context of live action. I don't believe a second of it. And when people say, well, Ben, you don't like strong female characters. Yes, I do. I could believe Cara Dune could kick my ass and 10 dudes standing next to me easy like this. Because look at Gina Carano, former UFC fighter, the way she's built, the way she enters the screen. You could believe she'll kick your ass. Not Sabine, like, all right, okay. She does her little shtick. And then she finds Ezra. We get to that golden moment. You took 6 episodes to get there. I'm so deflated. It's like, by the way, hi. Oh, you're chilling here? Yeah? Oh, let me come give you a hug. Okay. But it is indeed the most eventful one. And what I did enjoy about it is the fact that there is at least an inkling to build lore. These Dathomir witches are standing there. They seem to have an agenda. And Thrawn is there, which honestly sounds like an old, aged, boring Imperial blue guy in cosplay costume. He does not feel like a venomous snake guy who is like, oh my God, I better watch my pockets. I better watch behind my back. Like, I better watch myself around this dude. He could come out of any corner and I'm gone. I'm dead. He just felt so boring. It's each episode I struggle. I find effort. Like, let me try to just grab onto something and see if I like this. Just anything at all. So in the end of it, it's just like the atmosphere against the planet that they were trying to take you to a different place. It was like thematically different looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't personally agree with the Sabine thing necessarily. I understand where you're coming from. I think my issue with Sabine is somewhat her inconsistency, in a way that in Rebels we saw her, she could already fight at the start of Rebels because she's Mandalorian, and in Rebels you see her trying to balance being a Mandalorian while not only being a Mandalorian, while also trying to believe in something beyond herself, while struggling with her past and what she did to her own people. Like, that's a complex, interesting story.
That's in a Rebel show.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get to Ahsoka, my big question has been, and it kind of links to what you said early on, is this show takes place around 10 years after Rebels, okay? The 5 years after Rebels, or 4 to 5 years after Rebels, was the Galactic Civil War. It was the original trilogy. Sabine and the Rebels crew was in some way involved in that. That's cool. Then it's about a year and a half after Return of the Jedi where the Aftermath trilogy happened. Now, the Rebels crew aren't specifically mentioned in that. I think Hera was involved in the Battle of Jakku in some way, but maybe Sabine was too. But 18 months is around the time that the Battle of Jakku happened after Return of the Jedi, and that's when the Empire Art Echo is gone. That's kind of when the vast majority are gone, and then from that point, it's kind of like, right, now we can start rebuilding the Republic. So you've maybe got 6, maybe 7 years of war after Rebels. It's like, okay, fine. Maybe a year of rest, if that. But then, what have Ahsoka and Sabine been doing for the last 2 years? And yeah, maybe Ahsoka was trying to train Sabine and stuff, but like, what? And as you say, like, why now? Why? I mean, maybe they'll release timelines later and they'll change it. But the thing is that when Ahsoka's set after Mandalorian Series 2, that's confirmed to be around 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So it's just kind of like, why is Sabine now suddenly deciding that they need to find Ezra? And I presume it's because the rumblings of Thrawn has happened again and there's hope again. But it does seem kind of weird where, as you say, what are Ahsoka and Sabine actually doing after
Can I add
the
to
war's
that?
over. Go ahead.
You always find yourself in the most exciting things when you're introduced to characters, let's say via different chapters, who are in the thick of things. They're living their lives in the heat of the moment, and then the situation pulls them out of it. And now you're called on to, whether you want to or not, you could be an unwilling hero, or you could rise to the occasion, and you're thrust into this moment. The reason that I mentioned earlier that neither Hera, Ahsoka, or Sabine are non-characters is they have nothing. They only have what the show tells them they must follow. We must find Ezra. Because there's nothing else happening in their lives. That's why it's like when people tell you, but Ben, it's just fantasy, it's just fake. No, you're supposed to make me like suspend my disbelief. You're supposed to take me into this world. You're supposed to make me believe these are people and not just cosplay characters playing Ahsoka and Thrawn. I'm supposed to logically follow and like, oh, wow, look, all right, he's in the middle of this stratagem and this and that happened. Wow, now he has access to this key. Possibly he'll be able to get himself out of this prison. Oh my God, it's going to be a threat again. That's the juice of it. These are the small threads, little things that when you pull on and you do it effectively and masterfully, people will be talking about your Star Wars show 20 years from now. When you don't have this, I can't imagine people other than in the conversation. Oh, yeah, I remember I was 15 years old when Ahsoka came out. I can't imagine people coming back to and saying, well, this really touched my heart. This really happened. Nothing is happening. Everything is only happening because the plot demands it. And if you tell me, Ben, well, how come nothing is happening? Things are happening there in the show. Yeah, okay, that's plot. Point A to point B. This is where you begin. This is where you end. Absolutely happens. But storytelling is everything that happens in between that. Bless you. And that's my biggest problem with Sabine. I could easily forgive the small, frail, tiny actress who's, I'm pretty sure, very talented, and say, oh, all right, this action sequence is kind of corny there, but man, did I feel the passion and energy there, when she lays her eyes on I was expecting, honestly, almost for Sabine to jump, Ezra and start smoldering him with her luscious kisses. I honestly expected that. Like, if you're not exactly telling me, and she's so reserved and brooding throughout the entire show, oh, crap, she might be in love with him. That's why at the earliest mention of his name, she's like, yep, I'm going there. That's what I'm going to do, because I've been dreaming about Ezra for past 10 years. And even the climatic moment in this particular episode, it doesn't live up even to that bare minimum.
Yeah, it is. There is that. The rumblings and people's interpretations of it is Sabine. Does Sabine love Ezra, or is it because they had more of a? And I think you said this earlier. Like, they have more of a platonic relationship in Rebels. Right. It's not seen as a romantic thing. Ezra kind of fancies Sabine to begin with, but by series 2, 3. That plot line's gone, and Ezra just respects her as an individual and kind of as a sister, because the whole plot of Rebels is basically they're a family. Hera's the mum, Kanan's the dad, Zeb's like the older brother or like the uncle, and then Sabine and Ezra are kind of the kids. And it's all about their growth and their progression there, and there's not really a romantic thing there. And then she's obviously obsessed with finding him again, and it's like, okay, well, I don't want there to be a romantic thing, but I can understand if you've been apart for 10 years and you've kind of been thinking about how much you care about them, friendships can blossom into romantic things. I get that. But as you say, my biggest issue with this episode over everything is it was probably the most lackluster reunion I've ever seen in Star Wars. Like, I've seen reunions of characters that barely know each other in other content, some on live action, some not, that have more of that. Whenever Finn is separated from Rey in the sequel trilogy, he is literally like enamored to be finding her again. He's like running over to her, he's shouting her name, he's so excited. And this is like, oh yeah, Ezra's over there. It's like, you've spent 10 years without him. If I did see a friend of mine for a few months, I give them more of a hug than that. And it just seemed like he's all playing like chill, and it's like, okay, he's been by himself for like 10 years, he's had to survive, maybe he's tired, whatever, or maybe they're just trying to show Ezra's just kind of his chill, downplaying it stuff. But she's literally, half her dialogue has been about finding Ezra. She literally betrayed Ahsoka, potentially damned the entire universe, all to find Ezra, and now she's like, oh yeah, he's here, isn't he? It's like, I didn't know he was there. You didn't even know. You
I have a
followed these
suspicion
crab
that
people. Go ahead.
Ezra Bridger is a part of a British elite, and he was just like sipping his little tea. He's like, "Well, Sabine," and she just arrives and is like, he can't give her a hug because it's not etiquette.
Even though his character, as we've seen, does not follow etiquette in any way.
Yeah.
He's very one of Ezra's biggest character flaws was that he was too emotional. That's like
very emotional. Yeah,
that's like his whole arc. Like his whole arc is him learning. And granted, some people may be saying now, yeah, but when you finish Rebels, he finally is at peace. It's like, okay, that's fair.
But he's still emotional.
Well, when Anakin and Obi-Wan say goodbye to each other in Revenge of the Sith, and then when they're reunited again, but on Mustafar, those moments have been criticized by people. I personally thoroughly enjoy them, but they felt like they had more emotion in them. But even though Obi-Wan is a very stoic character, and in fact people criticize Ewan McGregor's performance of him in Attack of the Clones because he has so little emotion, but in Episode 3 and even in the Kenobi show, he does have more emotion. And it is so bizarre. It's so bizarre because Filoni wrote all this, and Filoni's had such a hand in this. And with like Book of Boba Fett, it was a bit all over the place. Mandalorian has been tonally a little bit all over the place because certain directors do certain things better than others.
Right.
But this, although this was, Filoni hasn't directed all these episodes, he's been heavily involved with them all. And he must have written in the plot how their interaction was. And I don't understand in what universe Sabine wouldn't see Ezra and him being like making a coy thing, like him kind of playing on her. And then she going, "I found you," and like sprinting towards him and just grabbing him. Nothing, even if it was nothing romantic, if it was just family love. If you don't see someone you consider to be a brother or a sister, a sibling, if you don't see them for 6 months or a year, you'll be like you see people at airports, so excited to see their friends and family hugging and stuff. And that's even in modern days when you can communicate with, mobile phones and the internet and stuff. There has been no contact for 10 years. They think Ezra could even be dead until weeks ago. She has given up everything, potentially her own life, betrayed Ahsoka to find Ezra. She's following these hermit crab people who are quite cool, but they don't make up for this. The naughty or noti, it said in the subtitles. And then she's just kind of looking around being like, is Ezra actually here? They said his name. I don't know if he's actually here. And then he's there and she's like, oh, that's cool. Oh yeah, there's Ezra.
By the way, did you notice how long it took for Sabine to crack that code on that device? And how long exactly it took her to land on the planet and find Ezra?
In what sense? Elaborate, like, as in.
So when Ahsoka brings the device to Sabine, it says, "Well, this is our chance to find Ezra." How long it takes her to crack it?
On the screen, not long. Maybe in universe, an hour. Maybe
an hour.
Yeah, and then when she's walking around on the planet and stuff, it was probably a few hours. But the sun. But the sun didn't go down.
Yeah.
So it's probably all in all a few hours, I guess, from getting on the Howler Wolf thing, fighting the bandits, and then finding the hermit crab people.
Kind of convenient, no?
Yeah. Even though the timeline given by Thrawn was we've got 3 rotations, that's 3 days. So you would assume that at least it would become nighttime. I thought what was going to happen is she was going to get attacked by bandits. She wouldn't be able to beat them because as been shown, she kind of held her own against Shin Hati a bit, but she can't focus on what she wants to be. She can't focus if she wants to fight like a Mandalorian or like a Jedi. We get a taste of it when her and Ahsoka fight in part 4 when the droids attack them. That was a cool moment because they're becoming one with themselves.
The droid fight was kind of cool, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, they're getting their synergy. And then, granted, she's got literal plot armor with Mandalorian armor, and she beats all those people, and it's like, okay, I guess I can believe that. But then I thought it was going to be she was going to get captured or something, and then Ezra was going to save her, or something like that. And I'm glad that she, as a strong female character, kind of made her own way, but it's taken away from that perception, because she has literally destroyed, Thrawn is going to return, otherwise the whole point of the show would be a waste of time. So it's like she is clearly going to make his return, and I know I keep saying the same thing, but I just can't get over how bland their reunion was, and I just don't know why it was that emotionless when
Is it because she's strong?
Things.
Is it because we're also returning to this, sensibility that she's a tough girl, she's independent, she doesn't need to run to him? Could it be partially that as well?
Maybe, but that would make sense if she hadn't been, and I'm sorry to use this term in a derogatory sense, why she was whining so much about him for the last couple episodes. Like, earlier in the episode, all her dialogue when in the prison cell was, "Where's Ezra? You told me we were going to find Ezra. You promised me Ezra.
Like
Where's
a little
Ezra,
girl.
Ezra,
she
Ezra?"
reverts into her inner child, that teenager that, hey, I remember him. He's my flesh and blood, brother from another mother. Like, I need to find him. But she's infinitely more believable and a strong female character in the show because she's flawed like everybody else. And I think the reason that Rebels resonates with people so much is that everybody's flawed and nobody's stronger or better than anyone else. And you don't need to sprinkle it with extra super strong, super glue feminism because she is strong. She has agency in the show, but she also depends on her friends. Because guess what? We all need a helping hand. We all need a shoulder to cry on. We all get our asses kicked by life at one point or another. It doesn't devalue your womanship or your independence in any way. I just like yourself, I was dumbfounded that she completely didn't feel vulnerable and give in to her emotion and just run to him when she saw him.
We even cried.
Because guess what? Yeah, because the guy looked the part. He looked exactly like Ezra. I'm like, oh shit, they got it right. Out of all things in the show, they got it right. Run your ass to him, please. Hug him. Show me that these are rebel characters that I remember. Not even that was granted in the show.
Yeah, the hug just kind of felt like a normal hug. I mean, like, I give my mum better hugs than that. And I see my mum all the time. And it's like, it was the thing that, where this has been such a build-up. Like, and especially, like, I would be so interested to know what people who've been watching this show have an opinion of when they haven't seen Rebels, because they must be like, oh my god, who's this Ezra guy? Oh, they've been talking about him, Baylan Skoll.
Well, that's my younger brother. He's watching the show right now. He hasn't seen Rebels.
And have you spoken to him at all about what he?
Yeah. He said, Ben, I think you're too critical. Like, it's all right. It's nothing amazing, but like, I'm having fun with it. Obviously, I have a couple of questions, right? Because you watched Rebels. You could tell me about this Sabine character. Like, he knows who Ahsoka is. Mm-hmm. Even though he didn't watch like a Clone Wars show, he knows who she is. And he said, like, all right, it's kind of like whatever, like other, Disney shows. He's a much lesser fan than I am. He only likes the movies, like the original trilogy.
Yeah. I just don't understand in what way it almost feels rushed, but it's not rushed because
what I felt now that you mention it, it almost feels like the writers strike happened much earlier, and a lot of good writers on Rebels and Clone Wars show left Filoni alone. And as you and I have discussed before, we all agree that all great projects, it's never just one amazing name behind the wheel, like Dave Filoni or George Lucas. It's always a group of talented people having the synergy to create and the vision to create something special. And I think here it might have been an example of they were already in the middle of restructuring Disney, plus service. Bob Iger probably came in and said, okay, cut this, chop this in half. This is too much budget. We'll deal this out. And it almost like sidelined Ahsoka. It's like, whatever this is, let's refocus on the future project. We're going to do something else. It just feels so abandoned and lifeless. And just things are happening just for the sake of, well, hopefully we're going to stick it all on the wall and the diehard fans will pick the show up and carry it. Well, that's not how you tell a good story. I know it's not fair comparing a book to a show, but I'm just going to give you one small example here. So I'm reading Dan Abnett's Eisenhorn quadrilogy, which is a part of a Warhammer 40,000, lore. And it's focused on this one Inquisitor character. And what I find absolutely fascinating, and the reason that I'm bringing it as an example, I think it is very much applicable to cinema because we do see it in the higher tier shows, is when Eisenhorn character is saying something, he's not saying everything he thinks or feels or intends to do, but you get it. And you don't get it through accident. You get it through either the way that the author set up the environment, either how another cast member in the scene reacts to Eisenhorn, what he says and what he interprets. There's always forethought in every single scene. And if you could break it into like 5 chapters and drop them in as one Ahsoka episode, you could accomplish the same kind of storyline that everybody could follow. It has nuance, it has layers and depth with it. And it's all not just shadows on the wall before you. And you're supposed to accept what you see on screen and say, yes, this avatar representing Hera Syndulla is Hera Syndulla. Why? She's green, she has Leku, she has a kid, and she pilots the Ghost. That's what we're supposed to know about Ahsoka. You see what I'm saying? This is what makes me hit pause on Star Wars. Like I'm tired of seeing all this stuff, all superficial stuff that they just keep throwing at us. I want to see characters. I want to be able to care for somebody. So like, oh my God, I hope this character doesn't die. Or I hope he finds his loved one, or this or that happens. And when they die, like, oh my God, oh man, this really happened. Like this guy, this goofy little dude in Andor that nobody seemed to care about, that intellectual kid who like spilled like some Marxist propaganda, like, oh, and this and that. And then this crate crushes him. And, the feeling that I had, like, oh, man, I was just getting to know this kid. Like, it's not that you weren't super invested into him, but when it happens, there's so much forethought put in this very few scenes that he's in the show that when he dies, you believe it. The gravity of it hits you right in the head.
I agree. And that's why he's actually one of my favorite characters in Andor. And that episode you're referring to is my favorite episode of Andor. I think there are other episodes of Andor that are probably objectively better, but that finale, I call it the crunch. When that crunch happens, there's not been many gut punches in Star Wars like that. There's one in Rebels, which is somewhat spoken about in this show, but in Ahsoka, but like there's moments that you get where there is, and Clone Wars, this is a very minor spoiler for Series 1, but I will try not to see what happens, but there's a certain clone called number 99. The emotion, I can't even talk, like if I talk to Megan about that episode, she starts getting teary, and it's like the emotion behind that character who's in like 1 episode or 2, and just you immediately sympathize and you want him to succeed and what happens to him. And in Ahsoka, it's like, well, they basically all have plot armor because, and this is one of the issues I find, unfortunately, when you bring a character from animation to live action, is that you are simultaneously continuing a story while introducing characters. And you're not going to spend this amount of time, effort, and money introducing Hera, Ezra, Sabine, Ahsoka to kill them off early on. You're going to make their death massive. So maybe one of them's going to die at the end of the Ahsoka series. I highly doubt it. I think what's going to happen is a couple of them are going to die in this movie that's going to be coming out. And then their stories are going to vaguely continue on. But it's like, they're not... If Sabine died, that would add weight to things. But the problem is now is that she pretty much can't. Maybe I'll be eating my words when episode 8 comes, but it just feels like they're not going to kill these characters because it somewhat feels like they're already getting started. But the animated fans are already like, well, we already know all these character stories. So, I mean, I've said before, the thing that was intriguing me the most about these episodes was Baylan Skoll and Shin Hatai. Like
they're the best parts of the show.
Yeah, I find them so compelling.
Is the best part of it.
Agreed. So, like, I've found them so interesting, and I'm like, I want more from them. We know what's going to happen with Ahsoka and that lot. Like, we know what's going to happen. They're going to survive, Thrawn's going to come back, and they're all going to fight him. But we don't know what's going to happen with Baylan and Shin. They're probably both eventually going to die, whether or not it's in this series or elsewhere, but they're not in the sequels, but they could also survive. Like, we don't know. And their pasts are interesting. Why their lightsaber's not purely red. Clearly they're not Jedi anymore, at least Baylan isn't. What have they had to do? Like, the story of, like, their backstory to me is more interesting than almost anything I've seen in Ahsoka. And although I have enjoyed Ahsoka, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm more interested in these, like, secondary antagonists.
You said it.
Because they have depth.
Mike, you said it. Just swipe everybody from Rebels off the show. Give me Lord Baelish. Give me his little apprentice. And you could reintroduce the clone era in the most fascinating, exciting way where you have this rogue element, a part of Clone Wars that we have not seen. Have we ever witnessed a renegade Jedi through like Clone Wars? Remind me, because Quinlan Voss doesn't qualify. He is loyal to the Order. Not really.
There's one comic, which is the Mace Windu miniseries, but almost all the rogue Jedi become Inquisitors. That's kind of what happens.
Yeah, exactly. So it could have been such an exciting new moment and an excuse to bring the Clone Wars back again from a different point of view. You're absolutely right. I'm almost more interested because when you see the actor, that unfortunately passed away,
Ray Stevenson.
Ray Stevenson, so bummed. You see him, it's like he's putting more effort into it than everybody else. Like just his mimicking, his emotion. It doesn't feel like just like he's making faces in front of a screen. I'm like, oh my God, this is potential for this character. Like, what is happening there? Why he left the Order? Where's this? I have questions about him. I don't have questions about anyone else. And when you say, well, Ben, because we know a lot more deal about them than we know about this character. Well, no, not really. We don't know what happened to Sabine or Hera or Ahsoka in that time period. There's still a lot of things that you could lead to and many questions being asked. But I'm interested in him.
Well, here's another thing about it is that you would expect those same questions to be raised about Morgan Elsbeth. She seems, on paper, like an interesting character. She survived the Night Sister Dathomirian Purge. She has all this knowledge and stuff, but they don't use her very well. She just kind of seems to be a plot device because she's just kind of there to find Thrawn. And I'm certain she's going to die by the end of the series because she's just a placeholder for Thrawn. And now that Thrawn's here, it's like, well, why? What use is she? Maybe I'll be wrong.
She's a mustache-twirling lackey. That's all she is. She's a nobody.
Yeah, exactly.
She's just there
boring.
to stand. She always talks to characters standing behind her back. And it's like, what does it do? Does it add gravitas to, like, Dave Filoni, what are you doing, man? Can we please have you back in the animation department telling us kick-ass stories that take time to develop, like multi-seasonally? This doesn't work. Just this and that. I'm like, oh my God, everything is so geometrically aligned. I'm pretty sure some people had orgasm when they saw that Star Destroyer for no reason at all go into atmosphere just to land on top of that temple, just so it would look cool. What happened to shuttles? We couldn't take a Lambda class shuttle and just freaking land.
So Thrawn could show off his entire battalion, and the armor looked cool. I think visually the show does so many things right. I think it looks very cool, but looking really cool, like the coolness factor, and this is an issue the MCU has and Star Wars on screen often has. They choose stuff that looks cool over stuff that either makes sense or is interesting. And it's like, Thrawn's, like when I saw Thrawn's battalion, I was like, wow, they look cool. The cracked armor, Thrawn stuff written on them, that Enoch guy, I was like, wow.
Bronze faces, right?
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is all very cool. And there's a lot of like deep Greek mythology delved in there. His gold face, there's so many things that could be. The Three Witches, I mean, that's in Macbeth, that's in Greek mythology. There's like, the Three Witches is one of the most iconic sort of, people who say prophecies and things they're across human history. They've been the idea of the Three Witches has been around for millennia in human history. So introducing them in Star Wars, like, wow, this is really cool. I'm so much more interested in these Witches of Dathomir, what they've been up to and what their goal is. Baylan, Skoll, and Shin Hati, how they survived Order 66, where Baylan probably, because it seems like Baylan survived and then he found Shin, because she's like 20-ish, so she was born around the time of sort of early Rebels, I guess, as in the show Rebels. So I'm like, I'd love for more of them. But with the Night Sister, the main one, Morgan Elsbeth, I'm like, I don't care about her. I don't really care about them. And some of the most interesting parts I found about previous episodes has been the stuff about the New Republic, has been the political things, which we got a little bit of in Mandalorian. But it's like, if we had... And this is one of the things that bothers me when people say you can't expect stuff from Andor as you get from Ahsoka. And it's like, I don't want every show to be like Andor. I just want every show to be as well written as Andor. Every single character in Andor, whether or not I can remember their names specifically, there is a desire to see more of them.
They have a function. Yeah. They have utility. They might not be a fully fledged character. Not everybody's equally developed.
No.
But when it's not called for, they bring in a character. They serve their purpose, they play a part in the story, and they exit. And that's it. Everything is just so well thought out and has a place and fits like this. And when people say, well, this is not, Star Wars. Yeah, it's generically different, But this is what I personally want. I wanted Star Wars to mature and to be able to tell a story that we can follow, not in terms of violence level mature, but in terms of like, oh, okay, I'm paying attention to this. All the political discourse, all the little Mon Mothma's machinations and family, woes that go in between her husband and her daughter. My ear is like, hold on a second, shut up. I want to listen to this. What did this guy say? What's going on here? It draws you, it pulls you in.
Exactly. And the thing is, we already know Mon Mothma survives, but its writing is so well, you're invested in what happens to her family. Why is the family, what happens is family dynamic, even though we know Mon Mothma is about without mention of her family in original trilogy, so assumedly she separates from them. But because it's so well written and you're so entranced in the drama of it, that's what draws you into Andor. That's why so many characters in Andor are so interesting, because you are interested by their story and you want to find out more. And in this, I just don't feel that. Another character in this that I'm really interested by is Huyang. Now, Huyang obviously was in the Clone Wars. But my question is, I'd love a book about Huyang. Because he's in the Star Wars Timelines book, it says that Huyang was basically invented like 5 years after, or 5 or 10 years after the Jedi Order was founded. So he's been around for 25,000 years, okay? What? Could you imagine how interesting a story about a 25,000-year-old droid is?
And he has nothing to say in the show. I was expecting him to drop some bars in his story in this episode. I'm like, come on, hit me, bro. Let's do this. When they said far, far in the galaxy away, I'm like, all right, this is going to be one of these flashback episodes. We're going to forget about all these nonsense. We're going to go all the way back. Let's do something different here. He's not telling the story. Like, oh, man.
Yeah, it's like, and he's not in the show again in this episode. It's like... But I was really interested. I was like, I'd love to hear some of Huyang's history. Let's hear more about the early Jedi. In canon, we have almost none of that. Really would love to know. Even just one sentence, just to give us that little drip of lore. But it feels like... What, unfortunately, I feel like is happening is... And this is the issue with certain Disney-era content. And it's that because they're so conscious of the future content that's coming out, because of the Dawn of the Jedi movie that's going to be coming out, because of this other mysterious movie that's going to be coming out, and then also the Dave Filoni movie and the Jedi Order one. It's like nothing is really being told. Like, why is Huyang not spoken about the High Republic? The High Republic is established. He doesn't need to spout 10 paragraphs and spoil the High Republic. The High Republic's already been tackled in Jedi Survivor. I've not finished the game yet because I've been playing Squadrons, but like, they use it very well. They use it as a plot device and a character learning about it in the past. Very well done. Why is he not mentioned like something about the High Republic? Wouldn't it be cool for him to say, oh yeah, I remember a time when it was all the Jedi, and then Ahsoka says, oh yeah, before the Clone Wars, and he was like, oh no, like 500 years ago, they used to call it the High Republic. And that was the start of the Jedi starting to fall. If he said that, I'd be like, wow, I already know that story, but I'm so interested. Instead, they're like, here's arguably here is the oldest character in all of Star Wars ever, who's always been with the Jedi Order, who literally teaches younglings how to make lightsabers. They've released the Star Wars Timelines book that only came out this year. Specifically, the second thing written in the whole book is that Huyang has powered up 5 or 10 years after the Dawn of the Jedi. So he's a major, major part of the Jedi. We don't even know how Ahsoka got him. How did he survive the Clone Wars? Why aren't we being told that? What, are they saving it for a comic somewhere? Is there going to be a book? Is there going to be another series about Huyang or something? And it's like, it feels like Disney knows what they're doing in 5 or 10 years' time, as a big company like that
That's
probably
what it
should
is.
do.
It's
and they're holding stuff back.
Star Wars had become what I feared it would become, and I knew it would become. I was trying to protect myself from the fact, but it's a product. It's in the full sense of the word, full-blown Disney product now. It comes off the conveyor belt, and a group of people sit down and they figure out what they can and cannot do, and they but one area where I applaud them, because you got to give credit where it's due, is that they experiment and try different filmmakers to see if they're going to hit the sweet spot. And when you get like somebody like Tony Gilroy, I imagine him being an American filmmaker, maybe not being embedded in Star Wars fandom, but at least remotely pedestrian like level know what Star Wars is. He cannot. If he's a filmmaker, he is familiar with Star Wars. But here's the person who comes in who is not invested into it, and still they put restrictions onto him and say, well, this is what you can and cannot do in the show. And he says, all right, these are my restrictions. This is what I'm going to do. But he still brings his own know-how and his style of filmmaking and storytelling. He says, I'm going to do this, and this, and that, regardless what exists outside. I'm just not going to conflict with everything that you guys told me not to do. But when you look at the show, it's so centered. It knows exactly what it wants to be. It conveys that sentiment very well, and it doesn't try to shoot above. It doesn't try to be an epic that like the Star Wars is known for. It doesn't try to be these extravagant lightsabers. It doesn't have Jedi. Thank God no Jedi in the show. But to me, it's in the full sense Star Wars, because in the most unexpected way that I personally connected, in the sense that it's a greatly told story that has a integrity of its own, and it doesn't depend on what audience wants. Let's remember some filmmaker from Star Wars who lived and died by that motto, George Lucas. He didn't make prequels the way that fans wanted them to be. He upset me and millions of fans around the world in the process, but you know what? I will always respect him for that. I'm still, I may rewatch prequels and say, oh my God, all right, this again. But the fact that he did it on his own terms, he always will be the godfather to me. Mm-hmm. And, when you take away that power from filmmakers, and when you have somebody who, I would say, and once again, your audience can jump on me all day long. Please go to Star Wars Timeline. This is not a self-plug, but please take all your shitty comments to my channel, not to Mike's. Somebody like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are more detrimental to Star Wars than somebody like Tony Gilroy. Because when you're so thick in the woods, you can't see the forest. You're so in it. Hey, let's play around with this character. Like, oh man, I don't want this crap. I just want a good story that has like freaking X-Wings in there.
Yeah, it's one of those. And as I said, we'll start to wrap up, but like, I did enjoy this episode because it is Star Wars, but because I enjoy basically all Star Wars. And this show, if no one who's listening to this isn't going to be fully invested into Star Wars, because people don't listen to, hour and a half long conversations per episode on stuff who aren't invested. So the people listening to this are either people who hated Ahsoka and want people to agree with them, or are people like ourselves who want the best for Star Wars, but have some varying opinions on it and things. But I generally enjoy all of Star Wars. I enjoyed this episode, but I wouldn't enjoy this episode if I wasn't as into Star Wars. And that's the big problem here. And that's the problem I think is happening with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that what it used to be with Iron Man, the first Iron Man film, phenomenal. I think it's one of the best MCU films to this day, because whether or not you like superhero films, you can enjoy that. It's a very good film that happens to be about a superhero. The first half of the film is not even remotely about superheroes. They don't even mention it. It's only because out of necessity of him being captured by essentially terrorists, he literally has to scrape together weapons of his own making to let him get out of this cave and hopefully survive. That's a deep story of survival, perception change, and it's got so many layers to it, and it works so well, and it's just amazing. And as much as I enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Doctor Strange and Thor 3 and all that jazz, like, I enjoy the cinematic universe, but you can't just pick up a Marvel movie or a Marvel series and just dive right in and enjoy it. With Andor, you don't even have to have seen any Star Wars movie in your entire life. You never have to have seen Andor. You don't have to have seen A New Hope. You can literally never have even heard of Star Wars, and you flick on Andor, and from the start, it is compelling and interesting. And I'm just finding that these franchises, and DC are kind of doing it as well, is that unless you go into watching it already enjoying it, and already just wanting more stuff that you enjoy, of the characters you already like, meeting other characters you already like, doing stuff that you like. If you're not going in already feeling that, you can't really have your mind changed. And I myself, again, I love Star Wars, so I'm happy to watch Ahsoka. But I think the difference here is that I'm happy to watch Ahsoka, and although I loved the last episode and I have been saying a lot of positive things about it, I'm not proud of Ahsoka. I was proud of Andor. I was telling everyone I've ever met, I was like,
I know exactly what you mean.
Everything I've ever said about Star Wars, ignore the prequels, ignore anything. If you're going to watch anything to do with Star Wars in your entire life, watch Andor. I've told people to stop watching Mandalorian to just watch Andor. I've told my friends, I've said to everyone, I was like, if I could have one wish, not a real wish, but a Star Wars related wish. If I could have that wish, I would just say everyone in the world watches Andor. I love Rebels, don't get me wrong, but Rebels is an amazing show, but I know a lot of people will just not enjoy Rebels for one reason or another, and that's okay. But I would genuinely, I know there are people who don't like Andor, but most of those people say that Andor's slow and boring, or that it's not got lightsabers and stuff what they want, which I think are quite juvenile opinions. Not to downplay anyone who didn't like Andor, you're welcome to your own opinion, but I find the majority of people who don't like Andor like Star Wars for it being safe.
They didn't find what they were looking for, which is totally fine.
Yeah, but I just think Andor's, I'm proud, I'm like, I don't have to make excuses to enjoy Andor. I don't have to apologize. Like, I love the prequels, but you can't watch the prequels without noticing the glaring problems with the writing and especially the dialogue. You cannot enjoy the prequels without acknowledging that unless you're like a teenager or younger. You just can't. With the
and
original
Mike,
trilogy,
I think you and I,
though.
we are on such good terms, and I completely relish our conversations, is because we're on the same wavelength. You are a very self-conscious fan. You know exactly what something is, and it's not because you agree with me, like, oh, find it agreeable. You know exactly what you're talking about. Like, you identify the reasons that you like Ahsoka for, while recognizing what it really is. So in a sense, we're not really disagreeing. You're just telling me, like, look, Ben, I'm all in it. Look, if you took Benjamin 10 years from now, 10 years before in the past, before I started my YouTube channel, I was in it. I don't care. Just give me. I'll eat it all. Star Wars, like, I know it's shitty. I know it's like subpar. I know it's okay. It's like when the Bounty Hunter video game came out. I had this discussion recently. Fans are saying now, look, this is before Disney came. Look at this amazing game. When Bounty Hunter with Jango Fett came out in the beginning, it was like a mediocre third-person shooter game. I
didn't even finish it.
It was like hundreds of PS2 games, 10 times better than that. But I played it back in the days because it was Star Wars. Like, all right, let me play it. I got a jetpack. Screw this. I'm playing it.
I agree. Like, I had that game and I played it, and I was like, and I used to be a massive gamer, and I played that game. And I remember getting like halfway through and I just kind of stopped playing, and I was like, I just don't really, I feel like I've kind of done everything I want to do on this game. I don't feel like any of the gameplay is that different. I think if you take away the jetpack, it's actually quite a crap game. And now
it's the gold standard because Disney didn't make it.
Well, that's the thing is and you're one of my favorite kind of Legends fans. Like, I'm a fan of Legends, I've been, thanks to people like yourself, I've been delving into some of the best Legends stories, and like, I stand by the Darth Bane trilogy. There's only probably 2 or 3 Star Wars novels I've read that could even compete with the Darth Bane trilogy. There's some other Star Wars stuff that I've read that Legends are really cool, don't get me wrong. But like, you not acknowledge that Legends wasn't perfect. There is a lot of Legend stories that really, really suck. Some of them are games, some of them are books, some of them are comics. But the problem is what people do is they go, Legends are the best. Why? Well, Disney sucks. And here's the 5 greatest Legend stories. Like, yes, but Legends was created, it was 40 years before the canon reset. And Legends really, I know there's Splinter of the Mind's Eye and some of the comics, but Legends really started with the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which was like about 10 years-ish after Return of the Jedi. So you had about, from sort of the early 90s until the 2010s. So you had about 20 to 25 years of essentially no films coming. I mean, but I know the prequels did eventually come out and things, but it's like you had a time period where everything was kind of free to do. And then, when Rogue Squadron came out, or the X-Wing series, and some of the other weirder Star Wars, then the prequels came out, and then they were like, right, that's it, no more Star Wars. And the prequels blew open the world, and I think the majority of best Star Wars content, I know you would disagree on this because of New Jedi Order and the X-Wing series, but like, for the Star Wars content I've read, I think a lot of the best Star Wars content that is in Legends came out after the prequels because of the sheer amount of lore that the prequels
I would not
brought.
disagree with that, actually.
And so,
some of the best content that ever came out in the expanded universe is thanks to prequels and in the following the footsteps of the prequels. I mean, I can't wait until you read the full Republic, Dark Times, Empire, and Rebellion series from the Dark Horse. You as a prequel fan, dude, you will never touch any like Marvel current. I don't care if it's Darth Vader. I don't care if it's Charles Soule, your favorite authors. You will never be able to look at them in the same light again. I guarantee you. And this was me, the disgruntled Star Wars fan. I'm like, all right, what is this comic book? Jesus Lord, give me Space Anakin, give me more. I can't wait. It was just, you were entranced by it.
Yeah. And the thing is with that is because they had 25 years to do it. The Disney canon, granted, the canon reset is nearing 10 years old, but for the first 5 years, all of it was completely stunted because everyone was just waiting for the sequels to come out because no one could really do anything until the sequels had established stuff. There was a couple of books, a couple of bits here and there, that kind of tapped into a few things, supported the prequels in a lot of ways. But once the sequels finished, that's when we got the High Republic. That's when we got Shadow of the Sith. That's when we got Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade. A lot of these books that are my favourite ones are ones that have come out after or were written like as the sequels were ending. And that's what happened with Legends. It was like, now that the movies are done, now that the big stuff's done, we've got a bit of time to play around what we have. And I think that so many Legends fans like to look at it with rose-tinted glasses. It was like, yeah, you had 25 years and you've hand-curated and chosen the best stories over the last 25 years, and you're trying to compare them to something that's been reset that's only really been in full force for like 5 or 6 years.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, do it.
This is my thinking exactly what you just mentioned until not very long ago. Unfortunately, it has shifted a little bit, and I will end my general thoughts on the current state of Star Wars and a kind of a sobering thought. The thing is that the happy accident that every artist is looking for happened to the expanded universe, where you had that window of opportunity where George didn't think he was going to make any more Star Wars. And it came out with it had the most momentum to create some of the most amazing, free, however you want to do stories. And when the prequels came out, regardless how I feel about them, it only reinforced that current, that flow, that torrent of Star Wars, and made it expand even more in the most unexpected, trickling kind of like pathways and just be very inventive in it. At the same time, I want to say that as all over the place, and it was in general because of the years it was between the novels and different time periods that consistently came back to or went far shot off into the future, it was generally a very consistent narrative. They put all of their effort in trying to tell you this one grand story that is very unexpected and touches upon many different things. When people first saw the Old Republic, what the hell, 4,000 years ago, what the hell is going on? Now the story has changed because of the environment around Star Wars, because it was a corporate entity, because it is attached to a streaming TV service, and now there's hierarchy, what they can and cannot do. I don't see a pathway how you can course correct and change it and provide room for people to be creative on a grand scale. Yes, happy accidents like Andor will happen, and something that nobody thought they needed yet enjoyed, like Rogue One, would happen. But as general as things stands, I think the only thing that will make a lot of disillusioned fans really deeply care for Star Wars again is an entirely new trilogy. Thrust forward by a whole new momentum with all new cast, all new heroes that finally is not trampled by corporate decisions or fan expectations, or let's step into what's trendy now. When it came out, the sequel started coming out. They only had the impact because of the Star Wars name. They never made a splash in the cinema world because they competed with so many different things they came out with. They were 10 times better than the Force Awakens. You know, and the only thing that's going to do it now is, and be like, oh my God, Star Wars is a phenomenon again, is when they are united in that single vision that we want something special again for Star Wars.
Yeah, and as someone who's very optimistic of Star Wars, it's hard to disagree. It's like, and one final point I'll say is, I love the Star Wars movies. They are among my favorite movies. But if you ask me to say what are the 25 best movies of all time, I don't think Star Wars would even make it. I think if you ask me what
at all,
maybe the original trilogy does have some great moments in it, but like if you say to me best films ever made, I go like Shawshank Redemption. I think a lot of David Fincher work's incredible. I think Social Network's one of the best films ever made, because how you have a film that's almost pure dialogue and be that interesting, I don't understand.
Well, Braveheart, nobody will dispute that.
It's exactly, and there's certain films which are, you know, there's I love Interstellar personally. I think that's great. I think Chris Nolan makes some incredible films. I think Dark Knight is probably one of the best films ever made. But a lot of these, and there's some Tarantino films. I love Tarantino. He's got some incredible films, and it's like there are certain films that I think are some of the best films ever made. But the irony is that Star Wars, I love them. I personally enjoy the Star Wars films more than any other films. I enjoy them the most. They're not the best. They're not even the best sci-fi films. There's Interstellar, Moon, Martian. They're all pretty much better than all the Star Wars films. Dune, yeah, I got that right here, right there. You know, they're all pretty much better than Star Wars if you look at them just as a film. But because they become a franchise and you become connected to the characters, I can't name a single character in Dune apart from Paul. I can't. But the film is pretty much better. Moon has one character in the whole film. I don't know his name.
Tremendous film.
But it's phenomenal. Yeah. Interstellar. I don't know a single character's name. I've seen that film 2 or 3 times. I can't even remember the daughter's name that Matthew McConaughey says like 10 times. I can't remember that because I'm not attached to the franchise and the characters and the lore. But the film blows my mind. And that's the thing is, as you say, like the Darth Bane book was so phenomenal because Drew Karpyshyn could basically do what the hell he wanted. And he just wrote a phenomenal story that happened to be around some people who could use dark side magic. But now we're not going to get that again because what they're going to do is they're going to go back in time. They're going to release a Knights of the Old Republic series or movie or something. And then all the best stories in principle are going to be saved for the screen. And then aside from the High Republic, and I have faith that when the High Republic's over, they've said that there's going to be more plans for stuff like the High Republic. So I think that I'm going to become a guy maybe in 10 years or so, I'm going to be a bit sick of Star Wars, and I'm just going to be reading the books because the High Republic has the freedom to do what it wants because it's not being touched by the stuff. But even that, we've got the Acolyte coming out next year. I'm insanely hyped for the Acolyte. I hope it's got the quality of Andor connected with the stuff I like about the High Republic. It's probably more going to be like Ahsoka, but in the High Republic. There's just going to be loads of lightsabers and loads of Jedi around fighting each other. That's probably what it's going to be, unfortunately. And the Old Republic has the ability and the freedom to have incredible stories going on that are different. But they're not going to do that. They're going to somewhat redo the best stories in Legends. And then once those films have come out, they're then going to let authors go in there and pick up the breadcrumbs of what's left. And as I said, I'm one of the biggest Star Wars fans you will ever meet. I have Star Wars tattooed on my skin. I have plans for more Star Wars tattoos. Most of my disposable income, when it's not spent on important things, my own money that I'm like, what do I want to buy? I buy Star Wars stuff. I get more enjoyment from reading. This is a very true thing about me. And my friends just don't understand this. I get more enjoyment reading mediocre Star Wars than I get from reading high-quality non-Star Wars content. And that's on me. I'm not saying that the Star Wars books are the best books ever, but when it comes to what I do in my private time, I want to enjoy myself and unwind and escape. There are plenty of books better than Star Wars books. There are better books written by authors of Star Wars books. They exist. I don't really delve into them very much. And that's a choice of mine, and I'm trying to expand a little bit, but I just find whenever I read or consume content that isn't Star Wars, even if it is better, it's very rare that I personally get the serotonin, the endorphins, that just pleasure just from consuming it.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. But I think that a lot of other Star Wars fans are either mad at other fans for feeling that way, or other fans don't truly know that about themselves. And I'm not saying there's not great Star Wars content out there. I'm not saying Ahsoka doesn't have its merits, and I do think Ahsoka is a good show. But as a show as a whole so far, if I wasn't a Star Wars fan, 6 or 7 out of 10? Probably 6.5.
4. I stayed by my score of 4.
Which is fair.
It is not a good show. There's nothing in it that is of enduring value.
Which is fair. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. You know, the only ones I would disagree with that on, which I'm not saying you gave them these ratings, is Andor, Clone Wars, and Rebels. I liked Bad Batch. I'm not as much a fan of Bad Batch as you are, but that's kind of for me. And that's the thing. And that's what people I think have to understand about me, is that I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars more than most things in life. And so guys, because of that, I'm going to be forgiving.
Mike's listeners, just if you can imagine Benjamin 10 years prior, this was Benjamin then. And he still read a good chunk of fantasy sci-fi books in between every Star Wars novel. But today's Benjamin is like, you know what? Let me put Star Wars over here for a second. Benjamin is going to go and enjoy some of the Britain's most amazing export, which is Warhammer 40K. And I couldn't be happier. This is my go-to Star Wars right now. When I read Eisenhorn, the Emperor protects. This is where I'm at right now. Like, I feel so great about not touching Star Wars.
And well, I'm still happy that you took the time to speak to me about Star Wars and Ahsoka. And so plug yourself. I know you're taking a little bit of a break, but tell people where they can find you anyway as we wrap this conversation up.
Sure, guys. Where I hope to see Mike next is on my channel, Star Wars Timeline on YouTube. Also, we have a Facebook group also called Star Wars Timeline. Come in, share your thoughts and opinions about the show. Just mind the 48-hour spoiler. Tell us what you think about it. There's no right or wrong way about enjoying Star Wars. Whatever you guys are into, whatever you like, despite our personal opinions, I think both you and I are very embracing of fans in general.
Yeah, I agree. You know, every opinion is valid so long as you're not overtly attacking or insulting other fans, or especially like actors involved in these things. Yeah. You can have criticisms on Filoni, but you don't be a dick to Filoni. Do you know what I mean? Not
you could be a fan and criticize him. You know, until this point, it's like biggest fan, and I'm still a huge fan. I'm not gonna abandon. You don't abandon your team just because like they lost a game or something. You know.
That's a perfect way of putting it. Yeah. And so, friends, if you want to find me, you know, I'm at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I'm on TikTok. I don't post there very much, but I do occasionally. A lot of videos of my dog, to be honest. But you can also, if you want more Star Wars content, you can check out the other Ahsoka discussion shows. I've got 2 more. Yep, there's 2 more episodes of Ahsoka out, so there's going to be 2 more coming for you for the next couple of weeks. And you can check out my variety of Star Wars playlists on YouTube as well. You can listen to my Star Wars interviews with authors like George Mann, Claudia Gray, Cavan Scott. Ben recently spoke with, semi-recently spoke with Claudia Gray and John Jackson Miller, and he did a great job there as well. And it's like, I've also spoken to other non-Star Wars people as well. I do interviews. I've been doing it for 6 years. I worked out the other day that I've released myself around 600 individual episodes of my podcast, including Star Wars, Genuine Chit-Chat interviews, and stuff on Patreon, and then also with guest spots. I think I'm on 700 individual releases of podcasts over the last 6 years, which is madness. In case anyone wanted to put my voice through an AI machine and make me say loads of things, you've got enough content to do it. But check out my other stuff, check out my playlist, subscribe, like, and follow Ben. You know, I hugely respect Ben's opinion. We don't agree with everything on Star Wars, but because we are respectful to each other, I always enjoy speaking with him, especially when we disagree about things, because it just opens up new perspectives. And at the end of the day, that's all we want from these conversations. So, Ben, thank you, as always, for being honest and open. I hugely appreciate you, good sir.
Always love talking to you, Mike.
It's so much fun. And friends, thank you for tuning in. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. And as always, may the Force be with you.
See you guys. Guys, I do apologize. Just shut up for a moment.
It sounds like a really bad remix of a song.
It's a New York remix. Yeah, I guess we're gonna cut this part out, right? Sorry.
You don't need to apologize. It's not your fault that people were...
Let me just hold my thought. Yes, where were we?